Again in studio. This time also about quality, but also about some knowledge about medicine. It's not easy to understand different forms of psychology when it comes to different forms of circulations of the blood. Of course, blood is some sort of water that is in the body. To understand blood, it's not easy from the medicine point. And then also the philosophical point of me when it comes to that form of the water in human. The blood is made from cells, and blood cells are extremely strange. And if you could program your blood or your water, of course, that would be a very difficult and very smart program. If you're thinking the blood is actually related to others, you might be extremely wrong because you are not drinking the same things like others do. Of course, doctors might think completely different and some even slightly insane. To understand different forms of the vertebrates is also important so you understand the vitamins, but also simple form of the immunity. The immune system is actually very important when it comes to extreme disease like AIDS or extreme disease that are in this world. If world is some sort of Africa and extreme poor, but if all people are my friends, that is extremely difficult because on some point you are going to hate your friends or people in world. The philanthropy of me the philanthropy, all the philanthropy is actually very difficult, but when it comes to me, the philanthropy is actually book, but also psychology, how to actually push the workers on the better level of money. In that case, you must forget the money. Those type of issues are usually extremely difficult. To understand different forms of veins is also important, but also to see these different forms of circulations. Of course, the venous system it's not easy, but also to understand different clots that can occur in blood. To understand from my book point, there are some sort of disorders together with the medicine because me think that actually blood is water. If you could actually program the whole body to be healthier, what type of body you would actually program? To understand simple forms and valves inside the blood is also very important if you want to understand the medicine. There are many veins in the body, but also deep femoral veins in legs, hands, but also in different forms of the body. There is also popliteal vein, but also femoral shaft. The femoral artery are also very simple and are actually in legs. In legs, there are also adductor channel and popliteal artery. To understand that type of relations together with your partner, it's extreme fiction. So if you are thinking about artery near, that's 100% fiction. And most of people, including doctors, trust fiction more than simple reality. That's actually extremely difficult. To understand different forms of arterial disease, it's not easy, especially how to heal them. To understand different forms and classic symptoms of the heart is also very important, so you also understand different forms of the coronary artery disease or even cigarette smoking some people. Usually that happen to people under 25. People under 25 sometimes even like tobacco, but also like the cigarettes, which is actually extremely dangerous. A lot of people in America are actually smoking and consuming tobacco, which would be the appropriate industry to invest in or purchase much more stock than usual on that market. To understand different forms of smoking, it's not easy, and a lot of women like to smoke. Those are actually the negative benefits Once people become too much adults, to the adultship, for sure, you should actually apply different forms of psychology and to understand disorders in adulthood. Of course, some adults also use drugs. To understand that forum, it's not easy, but also to understand how blood actually become weaker and weaker if you are smoking a lot or even use nicotine. If we would compare that to the book or how much people desire a good book, of course, that is not easy comparison. To understand different forms of potatoes and tomatoes, but also actually other forms of the fruit and vegetable. If you understand those type of fruit cells, you can actually improve blood a lot. The nicotine actually is extremely crazy and can actually affect your moods. Of course, some doctors are also smoking. To quit smoking, it's not easy, and it is some sort of an allergy that people have. There are different forms of the poisons inside the smoking, but also inside the blood when people are smoking. To understand the legal status of smoking, you should know that smoking is 100% legal. Of course, the tobacco are not simple products. If you are thinking from the point of purchasing entire company, especially on federal levels, to purchase nicotine products, it's not easy, and however, you should not offer them to people under 21. Of course, that would be extremely, extremely strange. In blood, of course, there are different forms of disease if you have a bad blood, but also to understand different forms of the development together with Java or coding. If you are actually coding better, if you could program all the bodies in the world to a higher level of health, what you would do. It is very important also to understand that people, when they see artists, they actually have high blood pressure. Understanding that, you'll also understand why they are following you. If you are actually slightly more artistical, to understand symptoms of the aging actually disappears if you become an artist. That's like some sort of psychosis for people. And of course, you might also lose the sense for the real daily living, especially if you are over $1 million. If you achieve that, you actually achieved some sort of an art disease. Not easy to think about me and different forms of fiction together with medicine, but me might be more like psychiatrist when it comes to simple forms of the life. The early stage of disease is actually not simple, and my book describes Taoism on that level, but also offer 9 image in one image puzzle, which of course show the development of different forms of models. To understand bloods, but also the theory of better bloods, it's not easy, especially with different forms of skin manifestations. It is very, very important also to sleep at least 2 hours a day. But if you are not sleeping, you might have some disorders. Those disorders do not include death, but are actually including a disease if you are never going to sleep. However, do not compare that information to Taoism because in Taoism everything is extremely difficult and different. The side effects of Tao are not drugs, but people are actually more and more relaxed. It is some sort of therapy also for the bad blood. And to understand different forms of the levels in 50%, it's very important to understand therapeutic meanings. The therapeutic effects together with book are very important, especially if you make 1 million of them. And the author should never pay for those books. They only navigate the production. The people are extremely productive sometimes and they wish a lot of development, but this development in social life is some sort of drug. People actually need someone that guide them, but not someone that is too much pervert or it do not offer any simple material. The material is actually very important, and people are able to multiply material with their work or their will. But because people are unwilling in 90%, they are like some sort of drugs of social life and social poverty and the life without book. So, some people in this world are cursed. They are going to drink alcohol and they are going to smoke. They are going to talk about money, but they will never respect artists. That's some sort of poverty, together with heroin and alcohol, where people want money or offering service. Sometimes it's very important to share basic philosophy, but also to understand some simple forms of the source. Of course, that is me. If me provide different forms of simple information, that's like fuel for different forms of medicine, but also philosophy. The philosophy, it's not easy when it comes to coding or simple forms of the engine. To understand the cells, but also to understand the simple forms of the stock, it's not easy. To understand the natural CO2, it's also not easy together with purification. Of course, the order and how we use different forms of the guide, it's not perfect. And this film, it's not perfect. But if you are going to compare to millions of films in the world, you are going to see that there is no perfect film. Every film somehow fails because no people in film are perfect. To understand ethanol and water, and you should not mix that together, it's very important. That's like you would mix water with the internet coding or ethics, which is extremely, extremely toxic. Agricultural part should actually also affect bloods, but only in case if you are actually owning some land or building some conditions for the farmers to provide more and more fruit or provide better conditions for the shoppers of the vegetables and fruit. The fruit laboratories are actually very, very important, but also to understand the industrial fruits that are in production. But some even come from Africa, so there on the fruit market, it's actually a huge opportunity also for the Africa and India to get in the forum of better knowledge and how the fruit works in this world of poverty. To understand cannabis, it's not easy, but also to understand different forms of the hemp seeds and oils that can actually heal people. Of course, that can actually prevent any type of the skin disease. So the oils are not simple. To understand different forms of the firearms in this world, it's not easy, especially if you are producing different forms with the legal forms. Also, the reproduction of my book is 100% legal, and you can actually deliver it anywhere in this world, but with minimum making 100 millions of items if you do copy my book. Of course, my title should be displayed on it, not to forget that. Also, to understand different forms of agreements in this world is very important. But what happens if there is no agreements? What if everyone rich is just distancing from poverty? To understand those forms, it's not easy, and how unperfect rich people actually are. But also to understand that there are some sort of cannabis industry and hot stocks industry. And of course, they are extremely complex with their mechanisms. To understand different forms of interpretation of any authors or any systems in this world is extreme fiction because people are usually too political and not enough simple. To understand simplicity is very important, but also to understand different forms of cannabis if you want to become health expert. Of course, the cannabis culture is extremely difficult and actually it's part of medicine. Some people think that medicine is just a very structured thing, but it's a simple fact that medicine it's not simple, especially if you are thinking about improving brains or improving your memory or even how you see different forms of the code or different forms of the film. The safety is also very important together with the water in this world, and you can actually observe different forms of the molecules, but also to understand targeting different forms of the pills if you are in that sector. The cells in body are not simple, but also to understand different forms of the designs and to respect different forms of the authors if they are actually providing something in the form of medicine. The philosophy and philanthropy is actually very important in medicine, but also to understand different forms of tetra forms or tetra pills